His first word was not mama, it was pits, a baby's mangling of lapis, the Spanish word for pencil. Before Pablo Picasso could walk steadily across a room, he had already told the world what he was made of. Not flesh and blood like the rest of us, but line, shadow, and an unquenchable need to mark something and call it his. This is the story of Pablo Picasso, a man who did not simply make art, a man who destroyed what art was and forced the world to start again from the wreckage. Pablo Ruiz Picasso was born on October 25, 1881, in Malaga, a sun-bleached port city in the south of Spain, where the Mediterranean light falls hard and golden and the shadows run deep as caves. On the night of his birth, the midwife looked at the newborn and believed he was stillborn. She set him aside and turned her attention to his exhausted mother. It was his uncle, Dr. Don Salvador, who stepped in, calm, quick, and saved the boy's life. He arrived fighting. He never stopped. His father, José Ruiz Blasco, was a painter of birds and game, a precise, modest craftsman who also taught drawing and curated the local museum. He recognized what was sitting across from him at the dinner table almost immediately. When Pablo was 13, his father watched the boy complete a painting of pigeons so masterfully that he handed over all of his own brushes and paints, and declared that his son had surpassed him. He never painted again. A father's surrender. A legend's beginning. At 14, Picasso passed the entrance exam for the prestigious Barcelona School of Fine Arts, an exam that typically took students an entire month. He finished it in a single day. In 1897, he enrolled at the Royal Academy of San Fernando in Madrid, Spain's finest art institution. He lasted a few months. He found the teaching stupid and instead spent his time at the Prado, standing before Velázquez, El Greco, and Goya, absorbing centuries of Spanish genius on his own terms. He was not a student. He was a predator, hunting for what he needed and discarding the rest. By 1900, at 19 years old, Picasso made his first trip to Paris and felt for the first time that he was somewhere that could actually contain him. The cafés of Montmartre hummed with painters, poets, and anarchists. The art moved fast and thought even faster. He brought his closest friend, a young Catalan painter named Carlos Casagemas. The two had met in Barcelona's bohemian circles and become inseparable, sharing a studio, sharing ideas, sharing everything. But Paris would tear them apart in a way neither could have predicted. Casagemas fell obsessively in love with a young woman named Germaine. She rejected him. On the night of February 17, 1901, he arranged a farewell dinner at the Hippodrome Café in Paris. He pleaded with Germaine one final time to marry him. She refused. He drew a pistol, fired at her, the bullet missed, then turned the gun on himself and pulled the trigger. He was 20 years old. Picasso was in Madrid when the news reached him. When he returned to Paris months later, renting the same studio he had once shared with Casagemas, visiting the café where it happened, something inside him had fundamentally shifted. He told the critic Pierre Dax, years later, "It was thinking of Casagemas that got me started painting in blue." And so began the Blue Period. From 1901 to 1904, Picasso painted as if grief itself had colonized his palette. The canvases were cold, spare, aching beggars hunched against walls, a blind old man alone before an empty plate, a gaunt, hollow-cheeked guitarist cradling his instrument like a dying man holds a prayer. The Old Guitarist, 1903, now one of the most recognizable paintings in the world. The public and critics largely turned away. They were uninterested in displaying images of poverty and despair in their homes. But Picasso kept painting. Some truths do not care whether they are welcome. In 1904, Picasso moved permanently to Paris into a ramshackle studio complex on the steep streets of Montmartre called the Bateau Lavoir, the laundry boat, named for its resemblance to the floating wash houses on the Seine. It was an absolute slum, broken windows, walls weeping with mildew. No running water, no heating, no lighting. The only toilet was a communal hole in the ground. And yet, over the next few years, this crumbling building became one of the most important addresses in the history of art. It was here he met Fernand Olivier, a model, beautiful and strong-willed, hiding from an abusive first husband under a false name. By 1905, they were living together, their relationship tempestuous, jealous, and intensely alive. She changed his colors, literally. The blue period gave way to the rose period. Clowns, harlequins, and circus performers bathed in warm pinks and earthy reds. In the figure of the harlequin, the masked, nimble trickster of the circus ring, Picasso painted his own alter ego, a practice he would return to throughout his life. He was happy in that grimy, glorious building. Until his death, Picasso remained nostalgic for those Montmartre years, reportedly saying, "We will all go back to the Bateau Lavoir, the only place where we were really happy." But happiness, for Picasso, was never a destination. It was fuel. In 1907, he locked himself away in his studio and began work on a canvas no one had ever been prepared for. When he unveiled it to his circle, to his friend Georges Braque, to the poets and painters who thought they understood him, the reaction was shock, confusion. Even Braque reportedly said it felt like being asked to drink gasoline and breathe fire. Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, 5 angular, confrontational figures, their faces fractured into geometric shards, their bodies refusing to occupy coherent space, obliterated every rule of Western painting that had stood since the Renaissance. Together with Braque, Picasso co-founded Cubism, reducing the visible world to geometric forms, exploring multiple perspectives simultaneously within a single composition. A face seen from the front and the side at once. A guitar shattered into planes, reassembled by the viewer's own mind. It was not just a new style. It was a new philosophy of reality itself. The art world was not ready. It had no choice. In 1917, Picasso traveled to Rome to design sets for a ballet produced by the legendary impresario Sergei Diaghilev. There, he met Olga Koklova, a graceful, disciplined Russian ballerina from a military family. He fell in love with her during rehearsals. They married in Paris in July 1918 with Jean Cocteau and Max Jacob as witnesses. Olga brought Picasso into a world he had never inhabited. Grand apartments, formal dinner parties, high society. His paintings turned classical and tender. A brief return to beauty after years of fracture. It did not last. In January 1927, a 45-year-old Picasso approached a 17-year-old girl named Marie-Thérèse Walter outside a department store in Paris and said, "You have an interesting face. I would like to do a portrait of you. I am Picasso." She had no idea who he was. Within a week, they were in a secret relationship, hidden entirely from his wife. Marie-Thérèse became his golden muse. In his paintings, she was luminous, rounded, sunlit. In Le Rêve, The Dream, 1932, she sleeps in voluptuous, sweeping curves and flat, bright colors. One of the most celebrated and sensual paintings of the 20th century. In 1935, Marie-Thérèse became pregnant. Olga discovered the affair and left. Picasso refused a formal divorce. French law would have forced him to split his fortune equally, and the two remained legally married until Olga's death in 1955. That same year, Picasso began his relationship with Dora Maar. Photographer, painter, surrealist intellectual. Sharp, brilliant, political. Where Marie-Thérèse was all warmth and curves, Dora crackled with intelligence and fire. He painted her as the weeping woman, eyes fractured, face twisted in anguish, a shrieking geometry of grief. It is one of the most powerful images in Western art. It is also one of the most troubling when you know where it came from. On April 26, 1937, Nazi and fascist warplanes bombed the Basque market town of Guernica during the Spanish Civil War. It was a Monday, market day. The streets were full of civilians. Hundreds were killed. The town burned for 3 days. Picasso heard the news in Paris. He was already under commission from the Spanish Republican government to create a mural for the Paris World's Fair. He had been struggling to find his subject. Now it had found him. In a fury of work, Dora Maar photographing each stage day by day, Picasso filled a canvas 11 feet tall and nearly 26 feet wide, rendered in black, white, and gray. A dying horse, a screaming mother clutching a dead infant, dismembered bodies, a bull watching impassively from the shadows. When a Nazi officer later looked at a photograph of Guernica and asked Picasso, "Did you do this?" Picasso replied, "No, you did." The painting hung for decades at New York's Museum of Modern Art, where Picasso insisted it remain until democracy was restored to Spain. In 1981, after Franco's death and Spain's return to democracy, it finally came home, first to the Prado, then permanently to the Reina Sofia Museum in Madrid. It remains there today, a wound that refuses to close. When the Germans occupied Paris in 1940, most artists and intellectuals fled. Picasso stayed. Although the Germans outlawed bronze casting in Paris, Picasso continued regardless, using bronze smuggled to him by the French resistance. He retreated into his studio and kept working quietly, defiantly, through the entire occupation. After the war, he moved to the south of France. He discovered ceramics in the town of Vallauris, producing thousands of pieces. He married his second and final wife, Jacqueline Roca, in 1961. He was 79, she was 34. He painted more than 400 portraits of her, more than of anyone else across his entire lifetime. In 1971, at the age of 90, Picasso became the first living artist to be given a retrospective exhibition in the Grand Gallery of the Louvre, a space that had hung only the old masters for centuries. He died on April 8, 1973, in Mougins, France. He was 91. He is believed to have produced around 50,000 artworks, paintings, sculptures, prints, ceramics, theater designs across his lifetime. Women of Algiers sold at auction in 2015 for $179 million. Le Rêve for $155 million. But no price captures what he actually left behind. The legacy is not clean. Marie-Thérèse Walter, who had waited her whole life hoping he would return to her, hanged herself 4 years after his death. His granddaughter Marina wrote that he needed the blood of those who loved him to sign each painting. These are not footnotes. They are part of the story. And yet the work endures. Because before Picasso, art looked a certain way. After Picasso, it could never look that way again. He didn't add to the tradition of Western painting. He cracked it open, reached inside, and pulled out something no one had ever seen. His first word was pencil. He kept that promise until his last breath.